Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. This is your host, Amina Ahmed, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Welcome back to NextGen on this week's theme of young women who are making some changes in our world, young empowered women, young passionate, intelligent women who are addressing the problems that we face in our world. I always talk about the goal of NextGen, which is to create a platform that amplifies these voices of young women of color, young immigrants, young Black women who are changing our world today. We're there on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon on Apple TV as well. Now, last week, we spoke with a climate change activist on what is the difference between mainstream climate activism versus climate justice, right? Focusing on the Black communities, on the poorer communities. And that's what we'll be talking about today. What it means to be a Black young woman in the climate justice sphere. We have with us Kaylah Bratwaithe. Thank you so much, Kayla, for being with us today. Kayla is Walaikum assalam. I love when people just start with the salam, greeting of peace. Thank you, Kayla. Kayla is a 19-year-old director of operations and logistics at Zero Hero. She's an avid organizer who's encouraging young activists to also get involved. She supports efforts to reinstate the environmental committee, and she's organized the Youth Climate Summit at Miami, and Kayla has also wrote for Teen Vogue. That is amazing. I want to congratulate you on your op-ed. I think that's like every teen's dream. Tell us about that.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wrote an op-ed about the impacts that the climate crisis has on St. Croix, the United States Virgin Islands, where I was born and raised, in September of 2019. So it was around like the global climate strikes where like millions of folks turned out to strike. And so I wrote it mostly because my family was dependent on the oil refinery for like paychecks. It's a really huge source of income on the island. And so when my dad was laid off with like hundreds of other workers, I really like got to understand the impacts that the fossil fuel industry has on Black folks, especially like Black Caribbean folks. The only reason I'm in the States now is because we like couldn't get money from that anymore. And so around the global climate strikes, one of my friends got a connection to Teen Vogue, and they're like, hey, like you should write for this because your story is like really important here. And so I wrote about like us being laid off from that, the environmental racism that happens on St. Croix, as well as like how Caribbean folks are reacting to all of this.
Kayla, you speak a lot about, how this has affected your life personally. The only reason you're in the States is because of the effects, and you speak about the fossil fuel industry and things of that sort. But can you tell us about, how did you even get involved, right? Tell us about your journey that got you to where you are right now as an activist that not only advocates for herself, but you do it for people around you. You encourage young people. So how did you get to that?
Yeah, so I've been organizing for maybe a little bit more than a year now. But throughout my childhood and like early teenage years, I was always really interested in, political change and like mass movements. A friend of mine, Elsa Mengistu, I met her 2 or 3 years ago at a conference. She talked about Zero Hour and the climate movement, and she like welcomed me onto her team, where I'm now the director of operations. And Zero Hour is a youth-led, women of color-led climate justice organization that really aims to dismantle the systems that have caused the climate crisis. And we've named those as capitalism, colonialism, racism, and the patriarchy. And so like what brought me into the movement was being personally impacted by environmental racism caused by the fossil fuel industry, and also understanding that Black liberation for like other marginalized folks is dependent on pressuring the system that has caused all of this like inequalities. I know that the same systems that have caused white supremacy and like wage inequalities have caused the climate crisis. And so that's why I'm here, and that's why the movement.
Yeah. And you spoke about Zero Hero. So tell me more about, first of all, congratulations. You are the operating director there and you're 19 years old, right? That is something that you need to be applauded for. So congratulations for that. But
Thank
tell
you.
me more. Yeah. And, I read your bio and I was just so proud, right? To see a Black woman who is not only just advocating for change, but who's encouraging others to get involved as well. That's phenomenal, Kayla. But I want to know more about Zero Hero, your work there as, the director.
Thank you. So yeah, it's an organization that like brought me into this movement. I'm super grateful for it. As the operations director specifically, I have a team of about like 10, 10 folks. That's about my team size.
Yeah.
I do a lot of the behind the scenes work. So I work a lot with our finance team. A lot of the work that like people don't like to do, like I know like I didn't particularly enjoy it when I first came on because I was like, what is this? It's a bunch of numbers that I really don't understand.
Yes.
um but now I find great comfort in, setting up the structure of the movement, setting up, like the foundation for people to organize. A lot of my work is like making sure that people can like continue to do our work and like improving the longevity of our movement. Helping like our teams like base build, helping our teams like um be like supported. So that's a lot of like what I do.
Yeah. So how is COVID-19? I'm sure it's impacted some of the work you're doing. So tell us more about that.
Yes. So COVID-19 has really impacted a lot of the movement building we plan to do this year. In March, which is when everything really started affecting the work, we had a bus tour planned to do like reaching out to communities and like talking to folks and like getting them like into the movement or us learning from them. And obviously like we had to like stop that because it's totally unsafe for us and the people we wanted to meet. Um, so now we're doing much more like digital work, which we're all pretty comfortable with. We're a national or international organization and we're all in different places. So we've been working digitally and virtually. So now like COVID has just made it a little bit harder to like meet up in person and like bond. It's made it harder for us to like physically support each other. Um, and it's just made us all a little bit cautious, more cautious about the future, just because like a pandemic really does change like a movement's patterns. I know that right now we're trying to figure out what to do for the next few years, and it's already been unpredictable, and now with the pandemic in the mix, we're all just incredibly lost.
Yeah. I think lost is definitely an important word here because a lot of activists, especially activists on the ground, are struggling with the pandemic and also, the bigger cause that they fight for. So I totally get that. But Kayla, tell us about why you think it's so important for young women to get involved, not just in climate activism, but just in general in the global like sphere of activism.
Oh my God, yes. So in general, the movement as a whole, not the climate movement, just like people wanting change, we need a multiracial, we need a multi like gendered, cross class, and so on and so forth movements. And so that means we need folks fighting like for like equality in general. We need folks fighting for like liberation from racism. We need folks fighting from liberation from sexism. And all of those like little fights add up to like a big picture. And so even if you're not in the climate movement and even if you're not in the Black Lives Matter movement, if you're in a movement fighting for equality, like that'll add to us eventually like having liberation. And so like get into this movement, get into a movement where you can really like own and take up space because you'll feel so empowered. You'll feel like you're really making a difference for folks here and folks like in the future. Um, and having the ability to like change the material conditions of your life and the life of others is like incredibly amazing.
Yeah. Kayla, you always speak about wanting to dismantle these systems that are upholding the climate crisis, right? So we can have a future generation that has clean water, clean air, and liberation. And I like how you say the word liberation, because obviously all of these movements are interconnected in some way or another. But, you know, you as a young person, as a Black woman, how have you faced difficulties navigating, you know, this fear?
Yeah, so I faced a little difficulty in that some spaces really aren't for me. Like they have definitely kept me out where I'm not able to do the work that I'm passionate about. Um, and so I've like uh, avoided that by like creating spaces of my own where I can work with other Black women or other people who understand that their liberation is tied up with mine. Um, and so that's one way that I've like avoided that like difficulty of not being welcomed into spaces and like understanding that it's all connected and understanding that like my presence is like valued and that like I need to bring other people in this fight with me is like important. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it's so beautiful that you create spaces for yourself, because I think the, you know, minority communities in general, we're always complaining that we don't have enough spaces, and that those in power aren't giving it to us. But at the end of the day, it's us that have to create our own movements, our own spaces, to be comfortable with each other. And you know, it's just so much more relatable when you have young women who are doing the same exact thing as you. And Kayla, we'll be right back after our short break. We're there on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon on Apple TV as well. We'll be right back. Welcome back to NextGen. I'm here with Kaylah Bratwaithe, speaking on her experience as a young Black woman in the sphere of environmental justice and fighting against this climate crisis. Now, Kaylah, you spoke about a little bit of the difficulties that you've faced, but how can men, right, and those adults make a safer and better space for young women? What can they do?
Well, first I think so I had to move because my computer was weird,
Oh, no
but like
worries.
we're good now.
Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing I always tell folks coming into this movement is to like sacrifice your ego. It gets in the way of like anything you want to do. And so if you want to create a space where you can both unlearn the like harm that you could cause, like if you benefit from the patriarchy, you have to unlearn what that's taught you. If you benefit from racism, you have to unlearn what that's taught you. And so like you can't do that and you can't create spaces that are actually like beneficial to the communities you want to help if you have an ego that like prevents you from unlearning those things. And so after you've like done that and after you've committed to really constantly learning what you need to learn to create spaces for us folks, then you actually have to create a space, right? And so that means like making sure that people feel empowered by your space. And so what men and what adults can do is like just like sitting and learning and listening. It's helped me a lot. And like I'm like a young Black woman. And I understand that I have a lot to learn. And so like you need to understand that you have a ton of things to learn from other people before you can do really meaningful work.
Yeah, I like how you say educate yourself, but don't just stop there, right? Actually create these platforms, because a lot of people are sitting there with, they're quote unquote woke, but they don't do anything to actually create real change aside
Exactly.
from, right. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we're facing is some people are educated, but then they don't do anything with that knowledge. But Kayla, I want to focus more on your Black identity. I was speaking with another activist yesterday, and they were telling me how with the climate movement, we have a lot of people at the forefront who are white, right? Who have that privilege, who are from the upper class, who are, very rich. But the fact of the matter is climate crisis affects Black and brown and poor communities the worst. So how has your experience as a Black activist been different from those of your counterparts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a ton of like rich Ivy League white kids in this movement, much more than I like know. And every day I'm very like surprised by it. And so like first like I graduated high school like January of 2019. I had a really weird college because I went to community college like for the last 2 years of my high school. And so like I'm like a working class like person. And so my experience is definitely very different from like the majority of this movement. Um, and so I forgot the last part of your question actually.
No, it's how has your experience been different, right, from
Perfect.
those of your counterparts? So,
Yeah. So I've found that like because of my experience and because of my identity as like a Black working class woman, um, I've had like the like unspoken responsibility to like ground some of the folks around me into stuff that is like actually useful for people like me. Because like if you're woke and you don't have the experiences or like the ability to connect with people on the ground, like your wokeness is like just to save face. And so if you're like a white Ivy League rich kid who's woke and you're not actually like sacrificing your ego and like connecting with me or people like me, then like it's like you're not useful here. And I like want people to be useful no matter your identity because like again, we need this to be cross class, multiracial, intergenerational. Um and so yeah, like I have had to ground people into stuff that's actually like realistic and useful and meaningful.
yeah. So what, has been your biggest learning experience? You said you're in this field, you've been organizing in the climate activism field for over a year. So how has that experience, what has it taught you?
Honestly, I know I said this already, but the best thing I've learned is like let go of my ego. Another thing I've learned is that like to forgive. And it's like it's all very interpersonal, right? Like my political beliefs have to be applicable to my relationships daily. And so it's like I need to sacrifice my ego. I need to understand that like I'm not a good or bad person. I'm a person who can harm my friends. And I need to like understand how to like be accountable, how to hold my friends accountable if they do something wrong. And for the movement, that looks like me understanding that we will not always get things right. You know, like we are going to make wrong steps, and that's totally okay. We just have to learn from that. And we need to be willing to let folks call us in so that we can actually help and we can actually support the movement in the way that it requires and it demands.
But what is one thing that you wish folks outside would know about the Black struggle with the environment? Because it's obviously different than the struggle of other communities. So what's just one thing that you've seen that people aren't aware of?
I think I would want them to know that like I'm not in this movement only to talk about environmental racism. Like my Blackness is affected by many other things. And that like when I talk about like, I don't know, the prison industrial complex or like me being an immigrant, like those things are very much connected to the environmental movement, just as much as like my story about being harmed by the fossil fuel industry.
So you don't want to just be confined to this one identity versus you have so many others that come with your Blackness as well. And I think that's something that our audience needs to take away, to realize that this is one thing that she does, but she has her stance on so many other things as well, and to be open to listening to those other stances. But Kayla, before we end today, I want to ask what your advice is to other young women who want to get involved. This week is Women Empowerment Week, and we want to, get other young women involved in this activism and organizing. So what's your advice to them?
My advice would be to just get into spaces, to own the knowledge you already have. Kay, who's also known as like Shea Butter Femme, on Twitter, I forgot their last name, but
Yeah.
I was on a panel with them maybe last week, and I was like, I'm gonna like sit back for this question because like y'all know much more than I do, and I want to like listen to folks who are older than me. And they were like, you can totally own the knowledge you have, and you don't always have to wait to speak up. You can take up space, and that is totally okay, and that's like needed, and that's like appreciated. And so like I came into this movement a little more than a year ago, like not knowing anything. And I like learned and I listened, and even now I still feel very unsure of like my knowledge, even though I'm smart.
Yeah.
And
I
so like
think that's very apparent. You are smart. I don't know why you're so unsure.
yeah, I don't know why either, but it's like I love when like other young women come into this space and they totally just like speak what they need to speak. And so when you come into this movement, like don't be afraid to do what needs to be done, honestly. And like what needs to be done is for you to like speak and share your experiences and share your stories. Because that helps this movement grow.
Yeah. And how can we, right, be better allies inside and outside of the movement for those who may be involved in another struggle, who may be fighting another struggle, but they want to be connected to this movement as well? What can they do?
I guess like the most practical way is to build coalitions with folks who are not in your like inner circle. Something that's really helped me is like connecting with different parts of the movement, and learning from those folks and learning how my work is connected to theirs and how we can both have like a mutually beneficial relationship. And so like join like maybe an organization that does coalition building, um, and just like learn from there. And that's how you can like become better allies if you're like directly supporting work.
Yeah. And do you think that there are enough allies that are doing this? Because obviously on social media, we see a lot of, outcry at moments where we see a lot of hashtags and people that are vocal on social media. Is that the same case outside of it?
I personally never think there's enough allies just because like I always want this movement to like grow and like bring people in. Um, so that's like my like very short response to it. And then additionally, like there are kind of like scales of allyship. And so we want people who are like maybe like very passive, and then you want them to grow into active allies who are like in organizations or who are in the movement. Um, and then you want people who are like committed. And like it's okay to be at any level of allyship, as long as you're like building, and learning and growing.
Yeah, and I think we all need to keep learning, keep building, and like Kayla kept saying, right, put your ego aside, learn from those who have been in this field for longer than you. And I think, Kayla, you should not doubt your intelligence. I think just from this 25 minutes, we learned a lot from you. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you, Kaylah Bratwaithe, for being with us today. And thank you to our amazing producer, Uche Okeke, who makes sure that our show runs smoothly. Thank you all so much. And until tomorrow, with a new, empowered, smart, intelligent woman. We'll be back. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all.
Thank you guys so much.